Welcome back to another episode of the Beyond the Blueprint podcast, powered by Lippolis Electric. I'm your host, Stephen Marcellino Jr., Vice President of Sales with Lippolis Electric. Lippolis Electric has been in business for 40 years. We are a full-service electrical construction company spanning from residential services, emergency services, energy efficiency, commercial construction, and technical services/engineered services. And today, I have the pleasure of being with Jay Lacayo, Detective of White Plains Police Department.
Yes, sir.
Newly appointed. And if you want to find him on Instagram, you can look him up at Jumpman Jay. And before we dive into the law enforcement background, how did you get that Instagram handle, Jumpman Jay?
My sneaker collection, man. I've been in the sneakers for almost half my life, so
I love that.
Yeah, man.
Big sneakerhead
avid
myself.
Sneaker collector, yeah, man.
Everybody's gotta have a passion, and sneakers for me is one of them as well.
Yes, sir.
So Jay, let's kick it off, and I kind of want you to just walk us through your journey from when you started out in the NYPD in the 46th Precinct to your current role today in White Plains, and what really motivated you to pursue a career in law enforcement.
Oh man, it's a great way to start the podcast. So I'm from a family of first responders. So my dad was in the military, and then he became a police officer. My uncle was a transit cop when they did the merger with the NYPD, and was a New York City police officer assigned to the transit unit. So for me, growing up, I always saw like men in uniform, so it was a natural transition for me. So got out of school, and I took every civil service test under the sun. Corrections called me first. State corrections called me first, and my dad was like, "Nah, you don't want to do that.
That sounds probably a tough
you don't
job.
want to be locked in with them." And at the time, I just wanted to get a job and just get in. But he was like, "Just wait it out. I think PD will call you." So NYPD called me, and I went in July 11th of 2005. And that's the old academy. The new academy they have now is way more sophisticated than where I went.
Did you do police academy in Queens?
No, so the original police academy was in Manhattan.
Oh, wow, okay.
And it was a shithole.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. It was just, they do that on purpose, right? They don't make it comfortable for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not somewhere where you like want to come every day and be like, yeah, I'm coming to work.
It's not necessarily a comfortable job
No,
either.
not at all. So they had it split into two tours. You had day tours, and then you had 4 to 12s. I did 4 to 12s. And you do your 6 months, and then they give you this thing called a wish list. Mm-hmm. So you write up where you want to go. So I think I put transit first, housing second, patrol borough Manhattan North, and then patrol borough Bronx was my last choice. And I got the 46th Precinct, which was patrol borough Bronx, which was my last of all the choices. But nonetheless, I got there in January of 2006 and had to learn fast, man. I don't know if you're familiar with this thing called Operation Impact, but that was where they flooded police officers in like high crime areas, and they just wanted you to go out there and be proactive. So there was a big thing about that with the UF-250s, the stop, question, and frisk. Yeah. So I was a part of that whole regime, yeah. So I went out there, learned very fast, and just got my hands dirty, man. That's if you know anything about the 46th Precinct, it's on the Grand Concourse, 181 and Ryer Avenue. So you're like right in the heart of the South Bronx, and it is a very violent place. And at the time, it was the most violent square mile in the Bronx.
That precinct's over by Yankee Stadium, isn't it?
No, that's the 4-4 you're thinking about.
Okay.
The 4-6 is, if you ever drive down to Deegan, right, and you're going towards Yankee Stadium, right, you're going to see these 4 buildings. It's on the right-hand side. Yeah. It's called Richmond Plaza. And if you go across, there's a little, like, overpass that goes, and it's like Sedgwick Avenue. That area, that's the 4-6.
Gotcha.
Very, very, very violent place, man. Yeah. So I had to learn fast, man. And, I was there for about 2 years. I did Impact, which was 6 to 2s. And then I did 4 to 12s briefly. And then I did a quick stint on Midnights. And then I came over to White Plains PD, man. I got there May of 07. So I will be completing 18 years there. I hit my 20th on July 11th, like as far as full state service, 20 on July 11th of 2025. But my stint in White Plains was pretty cool, man. I did patrol for about a year. Then I got assigned to this thing called the Neighborhood Conditions Unit, which was another proactive unit. I did 4 years there. And that we just did with like crime pattern stuff, quality of life arrests. And then I got assigned to the Emergency Services Unit, which is like SWAT, but you have to have either EMT cert or a medic cert. So I became a medic. I did that for 10 years, and that was the best part of my career.
Was emergency services through the city of White Plains, or was that
City of
county?
White Plains.
City of White Plains.
So when you go through academy, they so there's different schools throughout the county. Usually Yonkers throws a school or county throws a school. I got lucky, and there was like I think Mount Vernon was doing a school in 2010. So I jumped in with Mount Vernon, and I got my original SWAT certification through Mount Vernon. And then you don't have to like renew your SWAT cert. You just have to keep your hours up. But when you have to renew your EMT cert, you got to either go back to school or do this thing called the CME, which is continuing medical education. I had to go back to do the expedited course, like a 6-week EMT course. So I did my second one with Yonkers. So I did like half of their SWAT school.
What is it like being involved with SWAT? Because you see all these movies and different stories about the fictional side, I'll call it, of SWAT. But what is it like being involved in a SWAT unit?
It's actually pretty dope. You're a master of many trades when you do that. So when you're assigned to emergency services, you have the medical component. That's why you either have to be an EMT or a medic. And then you have vehicle extrication. Then you have rope rescue. And then you have special weapons and tactics. So that's like room clearing, doing search warrants and things like that. So for me, like I was part of that last group that was still able to do like no knock warrants and go through doors like 2 in the morning.
At the door and everything like that.
So I was a breacher. I was a breacher. So I was always like the guy to hit the door. I'm like the first guy, really getting into it. So I was breacher and then a shield guy.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. That had to have been some life experience right there. I mean, I can only imagine that, being involved from the 46th Precinct to doing, SWAT, that definitely probably shapes the way you think and conduct your daily life. I could only imagine.
Yeah, man, it was I had a blast, man. I did it for a decade.
Wow.
Had a great time. Things started to change towards the end, which is why I segued over into detectives.
Okay.
So I work with the mental health outreach team, which is attached to our strategic initiatives unit. And, I get to work with the community. Currently, what I do is, I'm a peer supporter for, police officers on my job. Also, if you're on another job and you need to reach out to me, I'm accessible. But I work with the homeless population and anybody who's looking to get services there and substance abuse.
Awesome.
So if anybody's looking to get like substance abuse, aid, if you want to get attached to some kind of rehab program, I help with that. So
very nice.
Yeah,
that's awesome. So you've kind of been in all different walks of the law enforcement career, so to speak, over the course of the past 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, with your experience and just working in different parts of the New York City metropolitan area, so to speak, between the Bronx and then White Plains. How has the landscape of New York law enforcement changed over the course of the past 18 years?
Bail reform changed a lot of things, man. And obviously the power of social media and the cell phone camera has changed the landscape of policing. So now you have these, I don't know if you've seen it on like Instagram or like YouTube, you have these like auditors that kind of run around and they're like bait cops and, they shove cameras in their face or they try to record their RMPs. So it's a little different. I didn't have that coming up, I have to deal with that now towards the tail end of my career, so that's a little different.
Yeah.
But I think bail reform was like the big switch. So now you have people who commit atrocities and are out on the street, and, so you have repeat offenders who have a, detailed, past, and they can commit a crime and be out in no time.
How does that work?
So,
because I hear about it on the news all the time, and me personally, I take the news for a grain of salt because, they're trying to, magnify situations and not really focus on the facts, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I'd like to hear, from someone with real experience.
It's basically you get locked up and there's no bail. You get RR'd.
That's
and
it.
you just get released back out into the street.
Wow.
That's exactly what it is. I mean, I could get into semantics of it, but it's
but from
in
the surface,
layman's terms, you could commit a crime and you're out in like an hour or less.
That's insane.
So no one gets held anymore. Everybody gets released. There's no bail set.
How is that like from an overall like high level? How is that sustainable for society?
It's not, man. And you could see it. the deterioration of like our society and no one having accountability for their actions, right? You see it on the news, it's always somebody who has a very detailed, violent past, and they're just out here roaming the streets free.
Yeah, because I've heard some pretty crazy stories, on, the news or just reading an article of, scenarios where people had been released on bail and they may have committed murder or something like that, and then they go and kill the witness. Or,
Yeah, it's happened. It's happened.
And it's just like a,
it blows my mind.
cycle of crime.
Yeah.
And it's like there's no end. Do they have, because I don't pay attention to it much, but do they have any plans in sight of trying to stop this? Or
No.
No, that's it.
I don't see it. It's different from state to state, right? If you go down south, it's a lot different. If you live in a state where, anything in the tri-state area is like what they call like a progressive state, right? So, their rules or their ideologies, I should say, have more of a progressive mindset.
Gotcha.
And so things are a little bit different here. Like if you went and did that in Georgia, you went and did that in North Carolina, it's not going to fly.
No.
But here, I would say the tri-state area is kind of on that.
Gotcha. And when you were with the 46th Precinct, did this bail reform rule start coming into play, or you were already out of there?
I was out of there.
So I could only imagine, because you mentioned that working in the 46th Precinct, it was violent then. I could only imagine now it's probably...
You went to jail back then.
Yeah.
You went to jail, yeah. It was a lot different, man. Like I'm the last of the Mohicans. Like I'm tier 2. I was around for a lot of things, and I in my career I've seen the shift. And I never thought I'd see it like this now. Because you don't think about that, right? I was like a 22, 23-year-old kid when I got on.
Yeah.
So, I was in my glory years up until, let's say I'm like 34 or something. And that's when I think the landscape started to change a bit.
Gotcha. It's crazy. Yeah, it's... Because I have a lot of family that's in law enforcement and friends as well. And they always talk about it. The rules and regulations, I'll call them, have made it so hard for honest police officers to be able to do their jobs now, it seems.
It's difficult because you have to think about what you're doing like 10 times over. You know what I mean? Because you don't want to become a scapegoat, right? You don't, there's a use of force continuum. You got to make sure you hit every single point of that use of force continuum before you even act. And that's a lot to process in like 10 seconds.
I was going to say, because you're a law enforcement, agent, so to speak. So a lot of the situations and scenarios that you and every other police officer are in, the luxury of time isn't in your favor.
No, man. You have to think on your feet, and you have to be very, very sharp. And I think it's hard when everything you do is scrutinized. Everything you do is underneath a magnifying glass, right? Yeah. So it's like everything that you think about, you now have to think of a counter to that, right? So. When I speak of this use of force continuum, it starts at the very, low, right, which is like verbal commands, right, and then there's like soft hands, and there's less than lethal, right, and then there's lethal. So I have to go through all of that, right, to now be indemnified if I do act and take deadly physical force. So that's a lot of shit to process when I'm having a conversation with somebody, and a lot of the time is any kind of critical incident will happen within this, space. So this guy's in a reachable, lungeable area, right? Because you're going to an apartment, or you're on a car stop, or something like that. So it's very close, right? And so now if I'm talking to you, you have a knife or a gun in your hand. You know what I mean? I got to do all of that.
So all those de-escalation tactics have to take place even if a perpetrator has a weapon physically in their hand.
Yeah, man. I don't want to tell I don't want to make it sound like, don't do your job, but you have to almost check every single box.
Yeah.
Because they'll go back and they'll be like, well, oh, you didn't do this. So then you're like, shit, So for me, I've been doing it long enough where I know, like, I'm checking off every box.
For you, it's just you do it.
Yeah, but like you get somebody who's on the street for 6 months.
Yeah, rookie, yeah.
You know what I mean? And then he gets into the shit. And now, mental health is like a big thing now, right? So you get a lot of people who are in crisis. They might be having a breakdown. So you're trying to talk to them, but it's not registering, or they're in a drug-induced psychosis.
Yeah, and they can't process anything.
Right? So now you go through this whole use of force continuum, and the next this person's running at you with a knife or a baseball bat. You understand? So it's tough, man. It's not easy by any means.
No, it's not easy, but that also kind of brings me to like the next thing I wanted to throw out there. So I know you've received a lot of awards for your de-escalation work. And could you share the story behind the award or the incident that occurred back in 2021 when you were with Westchester that kind of brought you onto that platform to win these awards, based on your tactics?
It was a barricaded person in crisis, and another jurisdiction was coming up to execute a warrant. Right, they were picking them up on a warrant, and something triggered this man. I don't know if it was maybe somebody he saw that he had an interaction with prior to, but was not compliant, barricaded himself in he rented out a room in his house, and it became a barricaded situation. So when you get into situations like that, you have to call like the HNT, which is hostage negotiation team.
Oh, wow.
So obviously with that, you have to have a tactical component, which was us. And the other jurisdiction that was there, they called our desk. We happen to have a team ready, so we go up there, and just like I just told you, like a whole use of force continuum, right? So anytime you have a stack, you have like if it's a barricaded, you have a shield guy. Then behind the shield guy is a guy with less than lethal, and then there's lethal cover behind them, and then you have the hostage negotiation team, which is behind the stack.
Wow.
So I was assigned that day. I was less than lethal, so I was the guy behind the guy with the shield. And so how it works is when you have a barricaded subject like that, you have to build a rapport with them. Because we were first on scene, I just happened to speak to him, and he took a liking to me. And so he and I were speaking, and initially he wanted suicide by cop. He was like, yo, don't shoot me in the face. I want an open casket, that type of situation. So.
Wow.
I'm like, dude, I don't want to do any of that, right? I would love for you to just come out and this end peacefully. And so we were able to talk to this guy over several hours, and he relinquished. He had a knife. He threw the knife out the window, and we were able to get him out of there. So thank God that ended peacefully. But yeah, I received an award for that. Me and several other officers that were involved in that particular situation.
Wow, that's a heavy incident. I can only imagine.
Yeah,
man. When you're in that scenario. So what do you like? What's going through your head in a scenario like that? You mentioned you were able to kind of build rapport with him, and he took a liking to you, which for you, the officers you were with, and the gentleman himself in this situation, fortunately that was able to happen because you were able to come to a resolution, which is thank God. Yeah. But what's going through your head in that scenario to build that rapport and kind of like, think on your feet to de-escalate the situation?
I just wanted it to end peacefully, man. Yeah. Like regardless of what people think, I don't think anybody comes to work saying that they want to take someone's life. Yeah. So, it's a very intense situation because you have to be able to have empathy and compassion, right, while you're in the midst of this. Yeah. And, I could just tell this guy just wanted to get his story out, man. They were up there trying to execute a warrant for something that he believed that, he didn't do. It was a violation of some kind of order of protection, and he felt that he was just trying to see his kid, and something got misconstrued in the act, and this is why they were there to pick him up. So he just wanted to make sure that he got his story out. And a lot of the times people just want to be heard, man. I think if you just let them talk and, you give them a platform to speak, and they feel like they got something off their chest, you can, resolve things without having to resort to violence. So, that's what just was running through my mind, and I wanted to end it. I wanted that to end peacefully. And there were times where, because in calls like that, like it seems like it's going your way, and then someone else says something, and it triggers that person, and then it digresses again. Yeah. So it was a lot of back and forth, and you think of, and it's crazy because I think of all the critical incidents that I've been in, and you always think of the worst case scenario. You don't want that to manifest, but you have to have that in your head in case something does go left. Where, all right, if this man does come out, then what's my plan? So I went into it you got to go into it even keeled, because when you have an even mindset, an even keeled mindset, you can either go, you can bring it up a notch or you can bring it down a notch. But if you start in the middle, it's always easier than if I come in on a fucking 10 or I come in too low. You know what I mean? So.
Wow, that's a serious life experience right there that you just discussed. And I appreciate you opening up about that. You
Yeah,
know,
dude. So one of my favorite calls because it ended peacefully. I have another call that was pretty dope. I had a guy who was on a roof and was threatening to jump off, and I talked him off the ledge.
Literally.
Yeah, that was. I think that's the pinnacle of my like career. That probably was one of my like greatest calls that I've ever been a part of, because I was able to talk this guy down from jumping off of a fucking building. You know what I mean? And I think that was the pinnacle of my de-escalation era.
So how did that? What was, you know, this one you were stacked up at the guy's door? What does it look like if somebody's like on the edge of a roof and you're trying, you know, how are you?
So this
how are you
particular
situated? What's going through your head? You know,
so this particular situation, it was only two ESU guys on the roof, myself and my partner at the time, Ryan Wiley, who is a phenomenal ESU cop. He's a medic. He's a phenomenal rope guy, right? So like when you go into SWAT school, you have guys that become rope instructors. And so my friend Ryan is a rope instructor. He's also a volunteer firefighter, so he does all this rope work. And so I was the guy that was talking to the subject on the ledge. So while I'm talking to him, it's almost like you're going to a trance. So you're trying to get this guy to bite on something, right? So you're having a conversation, and you need to get something where this person is going to like lock in, and then you can kind of get closer to him so you're able to grab. So back then they used to do this thing called a EDP snatch or EDP grab. So what you do is you set up a rope system, right, and a harness, right? The person who's talking to the person who's on the ledge is now in the harness. And the harness is basically like, if this guy goes over, my job is to run and grab this guy. The rope then yanks you, and you just got to hold on to this dude. You're literally hanging off the side of the building if this man decides to jump over. So, yeah, that's fucking intense, man, because you're talking to this dude, and every time I would say something and step forward, he'd inch up to go towards, like, the ledge. So I was like, man. And the whole thing that kept playing in my fucking brain was Hans Gruber and fucking Bruce Willis, right? And Die Hard. Right?
Die Hard, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I kept thinking, like, if I go grab this dude, he's going to push himself off. I'm going to go, and then I'm just going to see him falling down. And I'm just like, God, please don't let this happen. So I'm praying at the same time that I'm talking to him. Like, I'm like, God, please don't let this man, you know, jump, because that's going to ruin me, right? Like, I'm up there. I'm the last face he sees before he plummets to his death. It's just that's a very loaded situation. But I was able to talk to him, man, and during the course of the conversation, I forgot to ask him what his name was, right? And usually that's like one of the things they teach you, like get his name and become personable. So everything I was trying up until that wasn't working. So I asked him his name. He told me his name was Joshua. So I was like, that's a very powerful name. And something about me saying that his name was a powerful name got him to like engage. And so he's like, well, what do you know about the name Joshua? And so I was like, well, Jesus' name was Yeshua. And said, and if you kind of tweak it, it's Joshua. And he was like, and he perked up. And that's how I locked with him. I locked in, and then we were able to like talk, and then I was able to get him to give me a hug.
Wow.
And then once I was able to hug him, obviously I'm snatching him. And, you know, we were able to de-escalate that situation. But I think that whole call, soup to nuts, beginning to end, was probably a half hour. It felt like I was up there for about 2 hours. And when I'm telling you I was physically drained, after that, I could barely stand. After that conversation with this dude, because I was so
Your
engaged,
adrenaline was probably, like,
bro,
through the roof.
I was on 1,000, man, because it's like you know, you always prepare yourself for the worst case scenario. That ended peacefully, thank God. But like, you know, it took a lot of life force from me to engage in that conversation with him, and then like for it to end that way was prime.
Wow, those are some crazy experiences that you just touched on, and I appreciate, like I said, I appreciate you. You know, opening up about those experiences. That's great. I know a big part of your story is, you know, mental health awareness and outreach. And with your new position, you know, you do a lot for, you know, people that, you know, may need mental help or, you know, like you mentioned before, substance abuse. So with that initiative, how are you handling community outreach or outreach to other law enforcement officers when they're in need of mental health or maybe in need of crisis themselves?
Yeah, man. So I work with a non-for-profit called Reps for Responders. I'm a peer supporter there, and that's where I'm the most proactive, I believe. So there's a stigma with mental health in the law enforcement space. It's like if you go report it, to your job or whatever, you're forever marked with the Scarlet S. And so sometimes, having a conversation with someone who kind of does the same thing that you do opens up a new world for that police officer. Because, like, maybe they're not comfortable with sitting talking to a therapist. I'm not saying that every situation should require a therapist. Sometimes you might just need to talk about what you're going through. And then eventually you might be able to seek further help. I always tell people, just sit down and talk to somebody first, then figure out what's the next move from there, but create some kind of plan of action. You don't want to be the guy that's like, you're telling people to go to therapy. And I'm not saying therapy is a bad thing because I went to therapy. What I'm saying is that try different avenues and see how that works for you. You know what I mean? So try the peer support thing first. And if it doesn't work, now you have to up it. And then you go and sit down and talk to a professional. But a lot of cops are scared to do it because of the stigma that comes with it. Because if you think about it, this isn't just a job, right? It's a career, and it's a change of mindset. You don't just switch off being a police officer. I don't know about you, but when I walk into a restaurant, I'm looking, I can see the door. I'm next to an exit. And I have like a hasty plan is what I call it. God forbid somebody comes in here and does some crazy shit. I need to create a space where I can get out of here and whoever's with me is safe as well. Yep. So that's not something you just turn off. You know what I mean? So if you tell somebody that's been doing this or has been dreaming to become a police officer, that becomes a cop and then is having some mental struggles, and you tell them, hey, if you report it, you could potentially not be on the road, not doing something that you love, creates conflict there. So what I do is I just create a safe space for police officers to come and have a conversation. If you want to go out and have a hike, and have a conversation with me, let's do that. You want to have a cup of coffee, I'll do that. If you want to work out and have a conversation, we'll do that. But I'd rather you talk about it than you have it fester up and sit inside you.
People need to know, especially when they're in an intense career like law enforcement or the military or, firefighters, EMTs, you see, and you're exposed to so much trauma throughout your career, I would say. Yeah. People need to know that they can get help, because I don't care what anybody says or how tough people make themselves appear, so to speak. At the end of the day, the human mind is the human mind, and trauma affects everybody in different ways. So, everybody should feel comfortable. And I think now, 2025, I think the landscape of the world in general and the mental health, substance abuse kind of realm has changed in the sense that people are more comfortable to ask for help now, or they're getting more comfortable because it's not as looked down on. I would say because of social media, to be honest. I think that, not just social media, but I think social media and different types of, commercials and just overall exposure to awareness has grown so much in the past 5 years that, it really has, spoken to a lot of people to feel more comfortable with going out and speaking to somebody, which is important in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's a little different for cops, I feel, because you have to be this pillar of strength, and you don't want to be viewed as a weak person. But I try to tell guys there's strength and vulnerability, right? If you're able to sit down and have a conversation. I just think as a man, right, we're taught to be this like tough, resilient human being, but that can become overbearing to constantly have to be this pillar of strength, because, even Superman had kryptonite, right? Yep. So you need to find a place that you can feel safe to unload that, right? And so there's different ways to deal with it. You can journal, you can sit down and have a conversation with somebody, some movement. There's several different avenues you can take, but you have to do something to mitigate that, because when you're a police officer, it's like you're switched on, man, and then having to turn that off and then go home and have like a regular life, it's kind of tough, because we see the worst of society when we go to work, right? You don't respond to something that's very like jovial or happy. You're always going to do something that's like undesirable or shit that you don't want to see. And so, imagine balancing all of that and then having to go home and like people just deal with their personal shit. Maybe you have some internal shit that you're dealing with at home with your family, right? Then you have like childhood shit that, gets relived through adult trauma. because this one thing that I learned through therapy is that the shit that you experienced as a child, it manifests itself as you get older if it's not dealt with, right? So if you, like I grew up in Yonkers. Yonkers is somewhat of a violent place, right? I've lost friends to street violence and drugs, right? So those things take a toll. Right now I go to work and I see this on like the daily. You go to vehicle accidents, you see mangled bodies, you go to houses or apartments and you see overdoses, you see like shit that could just kick up stuff that you've seen or experienced as a child. If you grew up in a house where there was domestic issues and you go into a domestic call, these are things that could offset, or trigger, I should say, the trauma that you had in your life previously that you didn't even know fucking
was like
existed.
dormant.
Yeah. So
And then it shows up.
It manifests itself as you get older. So it's like, death is not natural. We're not supposed to see that. I think the average person has like 6 critical incidents or 6 traumatic incidents throughout their life, where the average police officer has 188 critical incidents throughout their career. Right?
Wow.
So trauma's perceived, right? It's like what you deem to be traumatic may not be what I consider traumatic. So trauma is based off of perception and like your life experience. So, I speak to people and I'd be like, when was the first time you lost a family member? And they're like, oh, I lost my Nana when I was 28. And it's like, well, I lost my cousin when I was 8. You're like, what? And how old was she? 20 something. And you're like, damn, people can't even process that.
Yeah, they can't comprehend it.
Yeah, so, trauma is something that, like I said, it's perceived, but everybody has a version of.
100%.
And so I just want to make sure that the police officer that's out there who thinks he or she doesn't have a place to go, that at least if you sit down and have a conversation with me, and if you need something else further, I can line you up there, but like just sit down and just get that shit off your chest.
Yeah. That's great, man. You're definitely a lifeline for people that need help in the community, which is awesome. Man. On the other side, what would like your advice be for like a newer officer that's coming into the role of handling crisis, and they're in a scenario where they're handling a mental health crisis, or one of the scenarios you discussed earlier? What's like a tip you could give a newer officer that's stepping into that role? So I don't know if successful is the right word, but so they can be successful in their role, I guess, in the sense of helping save a life.
Yeah, making sure that you pour into yourself. This job is a job of service, right? So you go out and you serve others every single day, right? So you have an obligation to yourself to show up as the best version of yourself. And so make sure you take a little time every single day to pour into you, because if you can't show up for yourself, how could you possibly show up for other people? So I always tell guys, man, like, remember why you took this job, right? And remember that this job is not for everyone. So you have to remember your why. Like, everybody has different reasons why they take this job. Like, I wanted to be, basically like a real life superhero, right? So I wanted to go to work, and maybe I'd be the guy to show up for someone and be their knight in shining armor. So I always tell guys, remember why you took the job, man. Because sometimes there's internal shit that'll make you be like, I don't really like this job. And then there's external things. But if you remember the person that took this test, did everything you did to take this job, you got to go back to revert to your why. And so I always tell guys to remember that, because that is the reason why you took this job. Everything else after that is I don't want to say small stuff, but it's stuff that you can get over, right? You took this job to be on here for 20 years or whatever the number is, right? Yeah. So, and that there's fine print with this job. You're going to see things that you probably don't want to see. You're going to see things you might not forget. Just remember your why, and remember that you are the person that's here to help. So if you're going through something, right, it goes back to pouring into yourself. Show up the best version of yourself. That's the best advice I could give like a newer guy, because you're going to see some shit that you probably are like, it's going to haunt you, man. There's shit that you see that just never leaves you. But just remember your why.
Thank you for that. That's great advice. And, before we wrap up here today, I'm curious to know, after 18 years, what is it that keeps you motivated to show up and do this every single day?
I feel like I was supposed to be doing this. So that's like why I wake up every day and have a thirst to go out there and get after it. Like God created this space where I was able to become a police officer. So, I was led down this road, and I think as a kid, like I always wanted to be, right? So I was just like, I'm kind of living my dream, Like I said, throughout your career, you get jaded a little bit, and, I can't say that I love it as much as I did when I first started, but that's just aggregate, buildup of shit, over, the course of my career, Collectively, I've been doing this for close to 20 years, man, and it's like, it gets a little redundant because, there's days where you show up and you do great shit. Nobody remembers that. If you fuck up, they highlight that. Yep. I think that's the tough part, You do great shit every single day, but the one time you fuck up, it's like, that's the highlight. Yeah, kind of sucks, man. But, I think just remembering that this is something that I always wanted to do, and I'm a very goal-orientated person, and I checked off every single box that I wanted to do in my career. It didn't look the way, it didn't happen the way I envisioned it, but it happened nonetheless. So sometimes, God closes a door to create another pathway for you to become successful or get to whatever your goal is.
That's awesome.
Yeah, man.
I actually thought of one more question I have to ask you.
Yeah, dude.
What's your favorite sneaker?
Favorite sneaker of all time?
Favorite sneaker of all time. Go.
I'm going to go with the Yeezy, the Nike Yeezy 1, the Zen Gray, to me is my favorite sneaker. Only because that silhouette there's no other silhouette like it, and it kind of reminds me of the Air Mags. It has like that Marty McFly look. And that shit is way out of my price range, right?
Yeah, those are crazy.
For me to get a Marty McFly, I got to sell my truck.
Yeah.
And I'm not
doing
that,
like
right?
$15,000 now?
They got to be like 20, man.
Something crazy,
yeah, 20,
right?
25. But yeah, I think the Nike Zen Gray Yeezy is my favorite sneaker of all time. My Grail, like that I own, I have it. I have the Zen Gray. I have all three of the Nike Yeezy ones, man, which are worth a shit ton of money, man. And I also have 2 out of the 3 Yeezy 2s, the Nike Yeezy 2s. I was unable to get the Red October, which is my like holy grail of holy grails. And funny story is I almost had those, but when Nike shut down the release, Nike reps came into the store that I was at and literally took my pair and walked out of the door. So yeah, I had them they were like right on the table, and I'm like, yeah. And Nike gave me and took that shit from me, man. So that was a heartbreaker. Man. But yeah, man, I would have to say like my grail, my all-time favorite would be the Nike Yeezy 1.
That's awesome. Yeah. I love to hear that, Jay. Listen, thank you for coming out.
Appreciate you, man.
And talking with the listeners on the podcast, and just want to thank you for your service.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
To the community, and keeping people safe day to day. And all the other men and women that are out there putting their life on the lines to make sure, that, the world could go around, so to speak. So
yeah, man.
I want to thank the listeners for watching another episode of the Beyond the Blueprint podcast, powered by Lippolis Electric. I'm your host, Stephen Marcellino, Vice President of Sales with Lippolis. Have a great day.